Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Katie. Today I'm going to be sharing 3 clay project ideas with you guys. I love working with clay because you can just be so creative and have fun with it and make some really unique projects. So I've got 3 ideas that I think you guys are going to love today. Can't wait to share them with you, so let's go ahead and get started. For all of my air dry clay projects lately, I've been using this Crayola clay. I find it to be very affordable and it lasts forever, so you can make a ton of projects with it. My first project is inspired by the channel Julie here on YouTube. I'm going to leave the link to their video down below, but I love this catch-all tray that they made and I wanted to try it out for myself. I rolled a chunk of clay into a ball and then used my clay rolling pin to flatten it out. You can make your tray any size that you'd like, but that's the fun part about this type of project because you can customize it. You could also make these into coasters or a much larger tray. Once I was happy with the size, I grabbed a plastic lid and used this as a template to cut out my circle. I pressed it lightly into the clay, then used my X-Acto knife to cut all around the edges, trying to make the lines as clean as possible. I definitely pressed a little too hard and accidentally cut through my paper below, but that's okay, no damage done to my table. And I removed the clay from the lid and then just started working on smoothing out the edges. I never try to be too perfect with my clay projects because personally, I like the more organic handmade look, and then I don't feel like I have to drive myself crazy with perfection. The easiest way to smooth out air dry clay is to wet your fingertips with a small amount of water and then go over any parts that have cracks or are uneven. You can also use a small paintbrush for this step. To create the indents, I used a small dowel, and you can also use a pencil or something similar. Then I just pressed it right into the top of the clay. I continued this process all the way across the circle, trying to space them as evenly as possible. Again, you can customize this by adding the indents closer together or pressing more lightly. I decided I wanted mine to be a little bit deeper, so I went back in and pressed down a bit harder. I added some more water to smooth out any cracks that had formed during the last step. Then I set it aside to dry overnight. I usually try to let my projects dry for a full 24 hours. This also depends on the thickness of the project, but this tray is pretty thin, so 24 hours was enough time. The next day it was dry and hardened, so I grabbed a couple of my craft paints and mixed together some light pink and a coral shade. I went ahead and painted the first coat on the tray, making sure to get in all the indents and of course around the outer edges. I was liking how it looked so far, but I did want it to be just a bit lighter, so I went in with one layer of the lighter pink shade. This mixed in with the darker shade below and just lightened everything slightly, which is exactly what I wanted. As a final step, I decided to do the same paint splatter look as the original inspiration, but I went with white paint instead. I mixed the paint with a small amount of water and lightly tapped the top of my paintbrush to allow the paint to splatter on the tray below. Then I let it dry and it was ready to use. I think this is such a cute and easy project for displaying little items on a nightstand or desk area. Next up, I had the idea to create a new stand for propagating my plants because I have a lot of plants and this is something that I love to do. So I rolled out a ball of clay and began to form it into a tube shape. Basically, I just kept rolling it with my hands to elongate it on each side. I was careful to keep the pressure consistent so that the shape stayed even and wasn't thicker on one side or the other. This process took a little while just because I wanted to make sure the edges were smooth and that there weren't any obvious bumps or weird areas. Once I was happy with the size of it, I pushed it down on the table so that the top and bottom would flatten and it would rest flat on the table. I also pressed the ends onto the table to flatten them out and smooth out the edges as much as possible. So basically I created a clay brick when all was said and done. I had a couple of these copper pieces that I thought would be perfect. You could get these at Home Depot or Lowe's in the plumbing section. I grabbed 2 of them and spaced them evenly on the clay, then pushed them down right into it. I decided not to leave these in while the clay was drying because I planned to paint the clay later, and it's easier to do that without the copper there. So I removed them and set this aside to dry overnight. While that was drying, I set out creating the holder for the plant cuttings. I had a bunch of these test tubes left over from another project. I can link these down below, but I added some glue to the inner part of the copper piece and then set the tube on top. This glue has to cure overnight as well. I repeated this process with the other tube and copper piece. Once the clay had dried, it was time to paint it, and I really wanted to find a color that would make the copper pop. I settled on this really pretty shade of green, which I can also link for you guys, but I was super happy with how it turned out. This one took about 2 coats of paint to cover fully. Once the paint had dried, I pushed each of the copper pieces with the test tubes back down into the holes, and they fit perfectly. Now all that's left to do is add some water and plant cuttings, and I can start propagating my plants. For the last project, I switched to oven-baked clay or polymer clay. I had some random colors that I knew I would never use on their own, so I grabbed these red blocks and rolled them out. I realized I needed a bit more clay, so I also added this purple one to the mix. It actually created this really cool marble pattern, which would have been nice if the colors had been different, but I am planning to paint this. I rolled the clay out into a long oval shape. The size will depend on what type of candles you'll be using, but mine are pretty small, so I didn't have to roll this out too much. I went in with my X-Acto knife and cut along the long edges, making sure to do a nice clean cut. I actually liked the rounded edges on each end, so I didn't end up cutting those at all. To create the wave pattern, I grabbed some tin foil, folded it up, and rolled it into a cylinder shape. I wanted mine to be a bit thicker, so I repeated this process a couple of times until I was happy with the size of it. Then I placed it under the clay and shaped the clay around it to create this little hill shape. Because this is going to be a double candle holder, I repeated this exact same process one more time with tin foil and slid it underneath the other side of the clay. I pressed down in the middle of them with my rolling pin to make the indent even deeper. Next, I grabbed my candle, and this one is pretty small, and I twisted it down into the clay. Then I removed the foil temporarily so that I could push the candle all the way through. Once it came through the bottom, I added the foil back in. I did the same exact thing on the other side. Then I baked this whole entire thing, tinfoil included, according to the package instructions. For this clay, I baked it at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 to 20 minutes. When it had cooled, I cut away a small amount of clay so that the candle would fit easily without cracking it. You want it to be tight enough so it won't wobble or tip over. The last step was to paint this whole thing, and I really liked that green color from earlier, but I wanted a much lighter shade of it, so I mixed it with some white paint. This created such a gorgeous green shade. It was exactly what I wanted. I painted the entire thing, and because the red color is so bright, I did have to do about 2 coats on this piece. If you don't want to have to paint yours, you can also just buy clay in the colors that you like. I just had this red and purple already, and I didn't want to buy new clay when I already had some, so that's something to keep in mind. So if you do paint yours, just wait for it to dry in between coats, and make sure to paint in the holes as well as underneath each of the waves. Now I can add my flameless candles in and add it to my entryway table. Again, this is such an easy project that anyone can do it, but it looks beautiful and unique. Okay, you guys know what to do. Let me know in the comments down below which one of these 3 projects was your favorite. I would love to know which one you liked the best. And of course, as always, if you guys are not following me on Instagram, go ahead and follow me over there for fun little DIY reels and sneak peeks of upcoming videos. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, make sure you do that if you enjoyed this type of video. I've got so many fun ideas coming up this year. I can't wait to share them with you, so I hope you will stick around and follow along. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon.